They called us fragile, weak, insignificant. In a universe ruled by beings who had mastered the art of war over millennia, humans were little more than a curiosity, primitive creatures who barely understood the fabric of reality. Then, they made the mistake of digging too deep. On a distant colony world, they unearthed something ancient, something that had been buried beneath our own history. They laughed when we warned them. They mocked us when we refused to set foot near the ruins. But when the screaming started, when their warships burned from the inside, their soldiers turned to ash, and the void itself whispered their names, they finally understood. We were never weak. We simply chose to forget the old gods. Until now. For centuries, humanity looked to the stars and saw only emptiness. We believed we were alone, the only sentient life adrift in a vast, uncaring universe. But when we finally broke free from our cradle, when we pushed past the edges of our own solar system, we learned the truth: we were not the first. The galaxy was old, ancient beyond our comprehension. Great empires had risen and fallen before our ancestors had even discovered fire. Civilizations spanning thousands of worlds had fought wars, made peace, and reshaped the fabric of reality itself. Compared to them, humanity was nothing more than a child taking its first, uncertain steps. And they let us know it. They laughed at us when we arrived in the galactic community. The dominion of Zelker, the Veiltheri Concord, the empire of red suns, mighty civilizations with history stretching back millions of years, mocked us, dismissed us, saw us as nothing more than a curiosity. Primitive, they called us. Fragile. A species that has yet to learn its place. And in many ways, they were right. Humanity was young. We lacked the genetic enhancements of the Zelker, the psionic mastery of the Veiltheri, the living warships of the Red Suns. Against them, we were outmatched in every way that mattered. But there was one thing they never considered, one thing buried so deeply in our past that even we had forgotten it. We were not the first humans to reach the stars. Long before our recorded history, before the rise of our great nations, before even the first written word, there had been others. A civilization that burned brighter than any that came after, one that shaped the cosmos in ways we could never comprehend. And then, suddenly, they were gone. All that remained were ruins, whispers in forgotten tongues, stories passed down as myths. Tales of gods who walked among men, of beings who wielded power that defied reason. Over time, those legends faded, buried beneath the weight of progress and time. We forgot. But the universe did not. The dig. It started on a remote colony world, Erebus, 9. A dead planet, barren and unremarkable, orbiting a dying sun. The galactic community had written it off as worthless, but for us, it was an opportunity. We had always been desperate for habitable worlds, and with enough effort, even a place like Erebus, 9 could be made livable. Then, the excavation teams made their discovery. Beneath the planet's surface, hidden for untold millennia, were ruins, not natural formations, but vast structures, cities carved from obsidian and metal that had never known rust. Towers that stretched into the sky, monoliths etched with symbols that defied translation. It was a civilization unlike anything we had ever encountered, predating even the oldest galactic records. And at its heart, a temple. The aliens scoffed at our caution. To them, it was just another dead world, another relic of a long-forgotten race. They had seen ruins like this before, at least, that's what they believed. The Zelker scholars dismissed the strange writings as mere decorations. The Veiltheri psions found no lingering consciousness, no traces of the minds that once ruled this place. The Red Suns saw no weapons, no threats, nothing that could challenge their war fleets. And so, despite our warnings, they entered the temple. They laughed as they shattered ancient seals, as they pried open doors that had remained closed for eons. They scoffed at our fear, at the way our scientists hesitated to step inside. But we knew. Some part of us, buried deep in our collective memory, recognized the truth. The stories, the myths, they weren't just legends. They were warnings. Humanity had not simply forgotten its past. We had buried it. And when the seals broke, when the temple doors yawned open like the maw of some great beast, the air itself seemed to scream. The awakening. At first, it was just a whisper. A sound too faint to be real, a sensation of something moving just beyond the edge of perception. The aliens dismissed it as nothing more than the wind, the shifting of old stone. Then the lights began to fail. Not all at once, not in a way that could be explained as a simple malfunction. They flickered, pulsed, dimming in rhythmic patterns, like breathing. Then, one by one, the researchers started disappearing. There were no signs of struggle, no alarms, no blood. They were simply gone, their names removed from logs, their existence erased from memory. Even those who had worked beside them struggled to recall their faces. The Veil-Theri Psions, those arrogant creatures who had mocked our fears, were the first to sense what was happening. They tried to flee, but something held them in place, rooted them to the ground as shadows stretched and swallowed them whole. And then the screaming began. Not from the researchers, not from the soldiers, but from the stars themselves. Across Erebus 9, sensors detected anomalies, black holes flickering in and out of existence, entire constellations vanishing as if devoured by something unseen. The very fabric of reality trembled as something woke. Something that had never been meant to wake again. We were never weak. The dominion of Zelker, the Veil-Theri Concord, the empire of red suns, all those mighty civilizations, those ancient empires that had ruled the stars long before humanity ever took flight, they had always seen us as lesser. As fragile. As weak. But they had never considered why we had survived. Humanity had not clawed its way to the stars through sheer luck. We had not risen because we were the strongest or the smartest. We had risen because we were the last. Because something had come before us. And because we had learned, in the darkest depths of our forgotten past, what not to wake. Now, it was too late. The seals were broken. The ancient ones, the beings we had once called gods, the forces we had once worshipped and feared, had returned. And the galaxy would finally understand what we had known all along. We were never weak. We were the only ones who remembered to be afraid. The first true sign of the catastrophe came from the Zelker fleet orbiting Erebus 9. A single distress signal, a shriek of raw terror, cut short by an unnatural silence. The Veil-Theri Psions aboard their research stations reached out with their minds, only to recoil in horror. Something had reached back. And then the stars began to disappear. Not in a metaphorical sense. Literally. Entire celestial bodies winked out of existence, not swallowed by black holes, not obscured by cosmic dust, they simply ceased to be. As if the universe itself was being unmade, piece by piece. Panic spread through the galactic community like wildfire. The Red Suns deployed an armada to investigate, but the moment their ships crossed into Erebus 9's system, they stopped moving. Their transmissions were a garbled mess of static and whispers in a language no one recognized, not even us. Then, the shadows came. The return of the Forgotten Ones. On the surface of Erebus 9, the remaining researchers tried to flee. It didn't matter. The ruins began to pulse with a sickly, golden light, casting long, unnatural shadows that stretched in ways that defied logic. Those shadows moved on their own, slithering across the ground like living things. A Zelker soldier, battle-hardened and genetically enhanced, raised his rifle at one of the encroaching shapes. He fired. The energy blast passed straight through, and then his own shadow rose from the ground and swallowed him whole. He didn't even have time to scream. The surviving humans activated their emergency distress beacon, broadcasting a desperate message across all channels. This is Erebus 9. We need immediate evacuation. The temple is awake. They are awake. No one came. Because across the galaxy, it was already too late. The collapse begins. The first empire to fall was the Veilthari Concord. Their psions, so proud, so confident in their mental prowess, became the first victims. Whatever had awakened on Erebus 9 reached into their minds, shattering them like fragile glass. Entire cities collapsed as their leaders were reduced to drooling husks, their once powerful abilities turned against them. The Red Suns, the warlords of the galaxy, deployed their doomsday weapons. Planet-cracking bombs, stellar annihilators, weapons designed to end entire civilizations in a single strike. They fired them all. It didn't matter. Whatever had awoken on Erebus 9 didn't burn. It didn't shatter. It didn't bleed. It only consumed. Fleet after fleet vanished into the growing darkness, their ships snuffed out like candles in a storm. The Red Suns, the most feared warriors in the galaxy, were reduced to whispers, echoes of fear in the empty void. The Dominion of Zelker fared no better. They had always prided themselves on their genetic superiority, their carefully curated evolution that had made them rulers of countless worlds. But what good was strength when the very fabric of reality turned against them? Their greatest cities fell overnight, not destroyed, but erased. The grand halls of their emperor, gone. The vast archives of their history, gone. Entire generations, gone. As if they had never existed. The truth of humanity. And then, as the universe trembled on the brink of collapse, humanity stood alone. Not because we were the strongest. Not because we were the smartest. But because we were the only ones who had seen this before. Deep within the hidden vaults of Earth, buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial, were records older than any civilization in the stars. Warnings passed down from an era long forgotten. Do not unseal the gates. Do not utter their names. Do not let them hear you pray. Our ancestors had known. They had fought this war before. And they had lost. But they had survived. They had sealed the forgotten ones away, buried them beneath the sands of Erebus 9, wiped all records of their existence. They had given up their own history to ensure that the rest of the universe would never know the horrors that once walked among us. And for thousands of years, that sacrifice had kept the darkness at bay. Until the aliens dug too deep. Until they laughed at our warnings. Until they woke the gods we had buried. The last war. There was no fighting the forgotten ones. Not with weapons. Not with fleets. Not with armies. The only hope was to seal them away again. And only humans knew how. Across the galaxy, what remained of the great empires turned to us, the species they had mocked, belittled, dismissed. Their fleets had failed. Their psions were broken. Their armies had vanished. But we had the last key. We did not share our secrets. We did not tell them how our ancestors had won, not truly. We only demanded their obedience. And for the first time in galactic history, the mighty dominion of Zelker, the shattered Veilthari Concord, and the remnants of the Red Suns knelt before humanity. We gathered what little remained of the galaxy's forces and launched one final mission. A desperate, suicidal attempt to reawaken the ancient rituals, to seal the forgotten ones back into the abyss from which they had come. The final battle was not fought in space. It was not fought with guns or bombs or warships. It was fought with words. With chants older than the stars, with names that had not been spoken in eons. And as the last syllables were uttered, as the final seal was reforged in fire and blood, the darkness screamed. The universe shuddered. And then, silence. Aftermath. The war was over. But nothing would ever be the same. The great empires of the galaxy were gone, reduced to shadows of what they once were. Entire species had been wiped from existence, their names lost to history. And humanity? We remained. Not because we were the strongest. Not because we were the smartest. But because we were the last. The last to remember. The last to fear. The last to survive. And as we stood among the ruins of the galaxy, the remnants of a universe that had nearly been unmade, we finally understood the truth. We had never been weak. We had simply been waiting. And now, humanity ruled alone. Because we were the only ones who knew the cost of waking the gods. And we would never make that mistake again. The air on Erebus 9 was thick with something unseen, not mist, not smoke, but a presence. It pressed against the lungs, made skin crawl, filled the mind with whispers that scratched at the edges of sanity. The forgotten ones were awake. The sky above was no longer a sky. The stars had twisted into unfamiliar constellations, their light flickering in patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. The surviving fleet hung in orbit, silent and motionless, as if held in place by something greater than gravity. And on the surface, at the heart of the ruined temple, the last of humanity stood. We were the only ones left. The Zelker warlords had turned to dust, their superior genetics offering no protection. The Veilthari psions had been consumed by their own unraveling minds. The Red Sun's warriors had vanished, their weapons crumbling in their hands. But humanity remained. Because we were the ones who remembered. The ritual begins. The final seal lay before us, a vast stone disk inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift when unobserved. It pulsed with a sickly light, veins of molten gold running across its surface, as if something beneath it was struggling to break free. The whispers grew louder. You cannot stop us. We were here before the first light. We will be here when the last star fades. But we did not listen. Instead, we spoke the words passed down from an era even we had forgotten. Words that had been carved into the bones of our ancestors, written in languages that no longer existed. The shadows screamed. The temple shook, the very planet quaking beneath us as something vast and unseen resisted. The sky above cracked, bleeding darkness as the forgotten ones fought to remain. But we did not stop. The price of victory. Blood seeped from our eyes, our ears, our mouths. The ritual was not meant to be performed by mortals. Our ancestors had paid the price of locking these beings away once before. Now, it was our turn. One by one, those who had started the ritual fell. A scientist collapsed, his body twisting in impossible angles as his shadow consumed him. A soldier screamed as his reflection in his visor dragged him inside. A priest clutched his chest as something within him reached out and took his place. But the words did not stop. The seal began to glow, its golden veins darkening, hardening, becoming solid once more. The forgotten ones roared, their voices shaking the void, a sound so vast it threatened to unmake existence itself. And then... silence. The aftermath. When we awoke, the temple was cold. The shadows were gone. The stars had returned to their rightful places. The forgotten ones were sealed once more. But the cost? Where once stood an army, now only a handful remained. The last of humanity. The last survivors of a galaxy that had once thrived. We had won. But we had also lost. We returned to Earth, the last bastion of a species that had paid the ultimate price for its survival. The great empires of the galaxy were no more. The dominions, the fleets, the rulers who had mocked us, erased from history. And now, we stood alone. The final truth. Humanity had never been the strongest. Never been the smartest. Never been the most powerful. But we had been the only ones who knew when to be afraid. And as we looked upon the ruined galaxy, upon the empty worlds that had once teemed with life, we made a vow. We would never let this happen again. We would guard the seals. We would remember the warnings. We would ensure no one ever woke the gods again. And if the universe ever dared to laugh at us again, if they ever questioned why humanity stood apart, ruled in silence and fear, we would tell them the truth. We were never weak. We were simply the only ones who survived. The galaxy had never known silence like this before. Where once there had been vibrant trade routes spanning light years, bustling stations filled with 1,000 different species, and the endless hum of interstellar warships, now there was only emptiness. The great empires of the stars had been erased, not by war, not by famine, not by plague, but by something far older, far darker. Something they should never have awakened. And humanity, the species they had mocked and belittled, stood alone. We were not victorious. We were simply the only ones left. The long road home. The surviving ships of our fleet drifted through the void, heading back toward Earth, the last bastion of intelligent life in a universe that had nearly ceased to exist. Those of us who remained barely spoke. What was there to say? We had watched entire civilizations crumble. We had heard the final screams of species that once ruled the stars. We had witnessed the very fabric of reality twist and fracture beneath the weight of the forgotten ones. And in the end, we had sealed them away, just as our ancestors had done before us. But at what cost? Only a handful of us remained, scattered among the wreckage of a dead galaxy. We had gone to war against gods, and though we had survived, we had paid in blood, in memory, in existence itself. And as we approached Earth, there was only one thought that haunted us all. Was it worth it? Earth, a broken home. When our fleet entered the Sol system, Earth's defenses were still intact. Unlike the rest of the galaxy, humanity's homeworld had not suffered direct attacks from the Forgotten Ones. We had kept our planet hidden, isolated, safe. But safe from what? From a galaxy that no longer existed? From empires that had been wiped from history? We had spent centuries preparing for a war against alien threats, never realizing that we were the only ones who had something to fear. And now, we were all that remained. As our ships descended, we saw the world we had fought so hard to protect. It was still beautiful. The ocean still shimmered beneath the golden light of the sun. The mountains still stood tall, untouched by war. The cities were still there, filled with people who had no idea what had just happened beyond their skies. To them, nothing had changed. To us, everything had. The burden of memory. The hardest part of surviving was knowing that no one would ever truly understand. The people of Earth went about their lives, oblivious to the horrors we had faced. They still believed in alien empires, in galactic politics, in the future of interstellar cooperation. They did not know that those empires were gone. That humanity had become the rulers of a graveyard. That beyond the Sol system, there was only silence. How could we tell them? Would they even believe us if we did? Some among us believed we should reveal the truth. That Earth needed to know what had been lost, what we had sacrificed to keep them safe. Others argued that it was better this way. That the people should be allowed to live in peace, never knowing how close they had come to annihilation. But deep down, we all knew the truth. The Forgotten Ones had been sealed away, but they were not destroyed. They could never be destroyed. And one day, someone would wake them again. Guardians of the Void. We had no leaders anymore. No great council, no galactic alliances, no warlords demanding our loyalty. We were the last survivors of a war that had erased entire species. And so, we became something new. Not rulers. Not conquerors. Guardians. We took what little we had left and built a new order, one that existed in the shadows, watching, waiting, ensuring that the seals would never be broken again. We erased all records of the Forgotten Ones from Earth's history. We purged every file, every ancient text, every whispered story that could lead someone back to Erebus 9. We buried the truth, just as our ancestors had before us. And we vowed that this time, we would not fail. Because now, we knew the cost. The weight of eternity. Centuries passed. Humanity expanded once more, reaching for the stars, rebuilding lost knowledge, rediscovering forgotten systems. They thought they were exploring new frontiers. They did not realize that they were merely walking among the ruins of the dead. We watched from the shadows. When explorers strayed too close to forbidden worlds, we pulled them back. When scientists uncovered ancient texts best left unread, we erased their findings. Some called us tyrants. Others called us cowards. But we did not care. Because we knew the truth. The forgotten ones were still out there. And one day, they would try to return. The final warning. I write this now, knowing that one day, these words may be found. Perhaps you are reading this in a future where the seals have weakened once again. Perhaps you are standing at the edge of the abyss, just as we once did. If so, heed my warning. Do not seek the old gods. Do not utter their names. Do not let them hear you pray. They do not listen. They do not bargain. They do not forgive. And if you wake them, know this. Humanity survived once. We will not survive again. The end.